wanted to actually ask you to go on a little bit of a journey with me. Now, I'm going to hold up this and state the obvious, which is that it's a bottle of water, correct? Agreed? All right. So for the purposes of this moment with me, I want you to imagine that the water that is swirling and swishing in this bottle is actually a vast ocean. And in this ocean, there is a tiny little fish, and because we're talking about pop culture, I'll call him Nemo. And, Nemo is doing the things that fish do. He's like talking to other fish, because that's what they do in Disney movies, and eating fish food and exploring his world. What we can be absolutely certain that Nemo is not doing is swimming around saying, water, water. I'm in water. This is water all around me. No, because this water is not water to Nemo. It's just reality. Now, I would suggest that all of us here and in the world are also swimming in a kind of ocean, except what's swirling all around us isn't water, it's narratives, ideas, big thoughts, frames, right? All of those things that we are so steeped in, stories. And like Nemo, we don't walk through our days thinking narrative, there's a narrative, that's a story. No, because like Nemo, this ocean that we're swimming in just feels like reality. And yet, these narratives and ideas are influencing everything about how we live and how we think about ourselves in the world. They are our reality. They feel like breath to us, like air. Now, the painful thing is that the current narrative ocean that we are all swimming in is toxic. Poisoned. In the best of days, this narrative ocean is making it hard for us to breathe most of the time, hard for us to know who we are. And in the worst of times, this narrative ocean is killing some of us. It is separating us from our families. It is stripping us of our freedoms. It is making us feel deeply hopeless at times about whether or not we will ever be able to be something other than divided, hurt, angry, distrustful, broken. So what becomes of our imagination in this kind of toxic environment? What becomes of our ability to see beyond now into some future where things might look different? Now, I see this as a really extraordinarily important problem for the social justice movement to solve. Because I believe, and I believe this so deeply, that if we are not able, if we hope to create the just, equitable, pluralist world that we all so deeply desire, we must first commit. As a broad community of storytellers, activists, funders, researchers, strategists, all of us in this space must commit to first working together to fundamentally transform the narrative ocean in which we are all swimming in. Now, the question is how? It's a big question. And I don't have the answers, obviously. We are all grappling with this question. But I do have some ideas that have come from some painful kind of aha moments. This photo, it represents one of them. This is Sarki Bartman. She is an indigenous Khoisan woman from the area we now know as South Africa. She was trafficked from Cape Town to London, England in 1810, sold to a freak show owner, and exhibited nude in Piccadilly Square as the legendary Venus Hottentot. Now, I had the opportunity to play this role in a play by Susan Laurie Parks off Broadway years ago. And it haunted me, this woman, Sarah. She haunted me, and so much so that I ended up traveling around the world, taking her and her story and this play to do tours and podcasts and radio dramas and workshops on 4 continents. You can imagine how devastated I felt when I was in a cab leaving JFK on my way home after the South African tour of Venus. And I realized I had this kind of terrible, nagging feeling that after all of this work, we really hadn't moved the dial significantly around some of the issues of racial and gender injustice and exploitation that this story holds. We hadn't really moved the dial at the mass culture level. And so I had to really grapple with the question of how could a story, a great story like this one, a powerful, rich, complex story, actually change the world? And I have spent much of the past 15 years trying to investigate that question. So at the Pop Culture Collaborative, we are sort of digging into this question of how stories become catalysts for widespread change in a variety of ways. And one of the questions that we have asked ourselves is, what do we need pop culture stories to do for audiences? And we came to a few really kind of meta roles that we think that pop culture stories have particular powers to play, kind of superpowers, if you will. And the first is to help audiences to reckon with and rewrite the origin stories of this country. We think that, film and television has done extraordinary work, and other mediums have done extraordinary work to tell us what certain people think the past is. But we wondered what happens if we activate pop culture storytellers to help us really dig and excavate and find a more authentic and true sense of where we come from. We also think that with that knowledge, that new, more authentic knowledge of where we come from, that pop culture stories can help us to draw the links and connect the dots and understand what is going on in our present, in our current world. And equally important, and we think this is probably the most complex work, but the work that we're pretty sure that Hollywood particularly is capable of, is that we need pop culture stories to help unlock the public imagination about what our future looks like. And we're certain that Hollywood is capable of this, because Hollywood is largely responsible for our current understanding of what the future is, right? It is a future where most people of color have been eliminated, and white women primarily are enslaved as sex slaves in the Republic of Gilead. It is a space where corporations own not only our land, but also our bodies. It is a space where young people are selected at random every year to compete in bloody battles called the Hunger Games, right? It is, in fact, an immersive narrative environment, as Rashid was mentioning, that is constantly reinforcing the story of our future, which is a story in which the social justice movement lost the battle. How do we feel about that? How do we feel seeding that profoundly powerful of a story of where we're headed to this dystopic, problem-filled view? So what would happen if all of the energy that is now being spent creating a vivid, technicolor, multidimensional vision of our future that is dystopic, what if all of that energy was being spent helping us to understand how we might build a pluralist future where justice and integrity and equity and care and generosity are at the heart of who we are? What if? The other question that we ask a lot is this one: what is the relationship between a great story and cultural change? And I think that the space in between story and great widespread cultural change actually lives this space of strategy, cultural strategy, narrative strategy, movement strategy. And so the question is, what can intentional strategy do? And we've sort of started to dig into this by even just visiting the most elemental ideas of cultural and narrative strategy. What is a narrative? We found it really helpful to understand narratives or narrative archetypes as stories people already know and believe to be real. World-changing stories are old stories that live in us because of all sorts of conditioning and acculturation and learning, etc., all kinds of narrative immersion. Those are the stories that we have to identify and understand, create lexicon around, and begin to actually tap into. I like to think of narratives as being like that sticky, annoying 80s pop song that comes into your head or onto the radio, and you find sometimes with embarrassment, sometimes with total glee, that you can sing every word of it, even though you never learned the lyrics. It's just in there. You don't know how it got there, but it's in there. And when it's activated, you know how to behave and how to think in relationship to it. That's the power of narratives. What we also came to realize is that through a lot of deep learning that we've done within our field over the past couple of years, is that in all of the mass culture change periods that we were able to dig into and learn about, at the heart of them, sometimes culture change happens organically, but at the heart of most of these periods of cultural change, whether it's the civil rights era or around climate change or marriage equality, is that there is some kind of intentional narrative system at work. A group of people who came together and imagined not how one story can change the world, but how a collection and a coordinated system of stories can change the world and create that depth of narrative immersion that is constantly reinforcing itself and creating a new sense of what is real, what is reality for millions of people. So we came to an understanding that that narrative systems can accelerate cultural change. They're not the only way that they happen, but that intentional, coordinated approach certainly can accelerate the pace of change within cultural strategy. Now, at the Collaborative, as I mentioned before, we are really interested in how to create a choice point in this country, in our society, a place where most Americans actively and consciously choose based on a yearning, a deep desire that they now feel because of the worlds and the ideas that they see reflected in pop culture, that they make the choice to be a part of building something new, a new society in which the values of pluralism and justice and generosity sit at the heart of it. There are a lot of people who think that's a good idea, but what does it mean to activate most Americans, meaning over 150 million Americans, to actively want to behave and live differently in order to make that vision real? Now, these behaviors up here are not things that we do not understand, that we've never seen before. They're kind of what we in this room would probably think of as living an accountable life. But imagine what might become possible for social justice movements if 150 million people woke up every day with the instinct to stand up and cry no when somebody is targeted because of their identity, with the instinct to step out of their familiar and forge bonds across difference and be willing to be open to change because of those bonds. Or the instinct to think of and act on behalf of all living beings in the land. What if people woke up with that sense of behavior, instinct, and value system in place? Now, I ask a lot of questions. And I ask a lot of questions that begin with what if in our work. And I'm delighted and really interested in being engaged with all of you in digging into those questions and answering them over time. So I don't know all the answers to the questions I've posed today, but there are two things that I do believe, and I know. One of them is that, as I said before, if we are to change the world, we must first change the narrative oceans that we are swimming in, We must create the infrastructure. We must invest for funders who are in the room, in the leaders, the innovators, the thinkers, the people who are daring to really build the strategies and plans to pursue that goal of transforming the narrative environments that we are living in. And number two, if we are to do this, we must work together with a spirit of radical cooperation and coordination in order to create the collective power that is indeed required to create a level of transformative change at that scale. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to talking further.